Hi there, everyone. 1:03 Pacific time. Good afternoon. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome to the second edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. I'm joined by my co-host, Edgar Zazueta, who's ACSA's Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. This is the second week in a row, Edgar, that you and I get to do this show, and it's like 105 out. So I appreciate no jacket and tie today.
I thought about the tie for a second, and I decided not to. Maybe next week, but we'll see.
Maybe next week. Maybe if we get like 70 degrees next week, maybe we can.
Maybe your air conditioning is just better than mine.
Hey, folks, thanks so much for joining us. This show is live and interactive. And to give you an idea of what that means, from a live standpoint, it's live TV. So we're not exactly sure what could come about. A couple of weeks back, Edgar's son decided to interrupt the show. Last week, I got a phone call in the middle of the show. So we never really know what's going to happen. We could get guests that come in, surprise guests as well. The other part, this being interactive, is that we welcome your comments and your questions. We will try and answer your questions for you while the show is going on, and we will incorporate some of your comments into there as well. If we don't answer your question, it's not because we don't like you. It's because we want to make sure that we are giving you a substantive answer. We don't want to wing it, but that's going to help us guide some of the work. So, Edgar, we're literally like just a few weeks away from the budget needing to be completely figured out. We're going to cover a couple of topics today. We're going to talk about the school reopening suggestions that came out from Sac County Office of Ed yesterday. But let's hit on the budget because that's something important to a lot of our members. Where are we right now? Because now we're in June and we've got a constitutional deadline, and obviously there's a lot of work going on.
Yeah, no, I think trying to think back where we left off last week, and I think even as the context about thinking about what's happening in the latest in Sacramento since our last show last Wednesday, I mean, in many ways, the world has even shifted since then, right? And I think when I say that, I'm reacting to the events surrounding George Floyd and just the action that we've seen, not just here in this state, in this community, in this state, and obviously around the nation and the world for that matter. And I think the context of that is that we've all taken a second to think about what's our role in this? What's our role in this discussion? I could say that as a parent. I know us as an organization and ACSA representing the folks who lead these students, who we have these students when they're impressionable and when at an early age. I think we're all taking that collective second to really think about what is our role in this bigger conversation. And the Capitol did that as well. For a few days this week, action kind of stopped and attention, I think rightly so. Even the governor, we've been relying on the governor's daily press conferences to get so much of the information. This week, it was focused on George Floyd and trying to address the racial inequalities in our society. And at least for a couple of days, not like COVID-19 or the budget went away, it just attention was elsewhere. With that said, there is work to be done here, as you alluded to. The budget is per the constitutional requirement. By June 15th, they're supposed to have a plan. I guess the big highlight there that our members would be interested in is that for a couple of weeks, we've been talking about the dire situation of schools, right? That the May revise was not a bright one. And we were worried about the potential cuts. And there's at least a glimmer of hope in terms of the legislative discussion, because as we've talked about, the governor's plan is just one step in the process. The legislature needed to consider the proposal and make adjustments as necessary. And what we're seeing now is that, frankly, some of the voices of our members, I think, are being heard. And I think folks are recognizing, the policymakers are recognizing that the job that our folks have ahead of them in terms of reopening schools, and I know we're going to talk about the Sac County guidelines in a few minutes, but I think it's all in that context that legislators, many of them have publicly said, we can't cut schools. We need to look at an alternative plan. And so what's happened because of that is now that both houses of the legislature are proposing plans, alternative plans to the governor that take a very different route. That they are proposing, the governor's plan, if you might remember, sets forth some cuts and says, if we get federal money, we will undo those cuts. The legislature is actually taking the opposite approach for the most part, is saying, no, we're not going to cut schools. We're going to try to keep much of this funding intact. If the federal funds don't come through, then we could see a number of other actions to mitigate that. The Senate's talking about, they're actually not talking about cutting schools. They're talking about greater deferrals, which have impacts in itself. And I don't want to minimize that. I think we would all agree it's better than reductions. And the Assembly, we're still waiting to see some of their finer details, but they're going to take a similar approach. It may not go quite as far as the Senate. So in other words, they may propose some reductions, but all told, this is a much different approach than what the governor took. As always, it's a step in the process. Folks can't get too excited yet. We need to see what the governor is going to do. This is obviously going to be a negotiation, but it's another reminder. And, I know we beat the drum on this every week in every forum we have. If there's ever a time to continue to have our voices heard in contacting our policymakers and frankly, the governor's office too, as they play a very important role in this process, all of that would be very timely right now.
All right, so that's budget, which obviously is very important. And folks, as far as live TV is concerned, we're about to pull off a first of its kind here at ACSA. We are going to bring on two special guests at the exact same time, which means you're about to see the most exciting thing. It's called a 4-shot. Look at that. See? Look at that. We have two of our senior director colleagues here. Margarita Quizon Armelino is our senior director of member services. Adne Mack is our senior director of equity services. Look at that. It is 4 people in one shot.
More people making me look bad with the jacket.
See, look at that. See, what's going to be really funny is if we have people that walk behind. Some people were giving me a hard time last week. They said, that is the greatest Zoom background that you have. And I said, yeah, it's so good that I can actually write on the whiteboard right behind me. It's that good. So Margarita and Adne are two first guests here on the show. They're going to talk a little bit about some of the events going on. So Margarita, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, you guys. I feel so special to be the first female and among the first staffers to be a special guest. So thanks for having me. Wanted to just quickly give you some updates or give our members a couple of updates that are happening in member services. One, I'm working with Adne and actually you, Naj, on a couple of equity networking events coming up at the end of June. One is focused on Asian American Pacific Islanders, and the other one is for our LGBTQ populations. And the reason that these are important is, number one, they're a continuation of the work that we started with Nicole Anderson about 4 or 5 years ago. And we're bringing them to a virtual platform now so that we can continue this important work and some of the conversations that, that need to happen, especially during these really weird, odd, and challenging times. But the purpose of the networking events is really threefold. It's to give a safe space for our subgroups to have these important conversations and to share some of their concerns. It allows ACSA to learn from those because we use them sort of as a listening session while allowing them to empower their voices. And then it gives members an opportunity also to strategize and brainstorm with each other about improving their leadership for themselves as well as for the populations that they serve. And then, of course, we're always using current events to have these impactful conversations, to use these platforms to have these impactful conversations. And so one of the things that we're also going to be focusing on in these two upcoming networking events is, the Black Lives Matters movement and some of the racial tension that's happening around the nation, actually. Adne, did you want to add anything to that?
Listen, we're all facing some really challenging times and there's a lot of work for us to do. And so what we thought it was best as an association is really to bring together a lot of our experts around the state and some of our equity warriors and champions and have a conversation about what this means for education and what it means for school leaders around the state and around the country. And so on Monday, we're going to bring together a whole host of ACSA partners to engage in this conversation, because we want to keep it moving. We want to increase the visibility and ensure that we're having a quality conversation about the inequities that are happening in our educational system. And some of the stress and some of the fear and pain that folks are going through, and just have an open dialogue so that moving into this next school year, folks are ready to really have a conversation about some of the race issues that are affecting our country at this time.
And that is going to be, thank you guys very much for that. That town hall is going to be at 5:30 on Monday. It's going to be live on the ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube sites, what you're watching us right now. ACSA Executive Director Wes Smith is going to be moderating a really powerful live discussion. And we're going to have it very similar to the format that we have here, where you can submit questions and comments as the discussion is going on, and our panelists will have an opportunity to address that. So that's coming up Monday, 5:30 here live on ACSA's Facebook page and our YouTube site. Margarita and Adne, thanks so much for being with us, our first guests on this show. Live television, it's always good. So thanks so much for being with us today.
All right, thank you.
Edgar, let's talk about school reopening, because systematically, moment after moment, we have had CDC release their recommendations. We had Los Angeles County Office of Ed, which represents a third of the students in this state. They brought theirs out. Yesterday afternoon, we got the 36-page report from Sacramento County Office of Education that laid out some of their recommendations. Their recommendations, I'm just going to go down this list here, just with a few. Their suggestions: modified school schedules, perhaps half-day or block schedules, students in smaller groups, desks 6 feet apart, individually served plates or boxed meals for lunch, staggered lunches and recesses, no assemblies or dances or field trips. I think what's important, because there are two things that a lot of people missed out of this with the story that came out on various media sources. And it's not due to a lack of reporting, but it just, was certainly further down. One, there is no one size fits all to this. And we've had the opportunity to speak with superintendents from districts. We talked with Chris Hoffman from Elk Grove Unified a couple of weeks ago on the ACSA campus tour, and they said, we're going to really make a decision. And so many other superintendents have said the same thing. We're going to take the recommendations from one entity, recommendations from another, and we're going to go ahead and build a substantive plan that is customized for their district. The other thing that I think might have been lost in this is that these were recommendations. It wasn't a mandate. And Dave Gordon, who's the county superintendent here in Sacramento County, said, this is what it is right now on June 2nd, as of yesterday. But things could change in a week or a month. Mm-hmm. That could fall on either side, positive or negative, as far as these suggestions were concerned. So, you're in Sacramento County just like me. What were your reflections through your lens, and what do you see moving forward?
Every time one of these plans comes out, and even hearing you talk through some of the specifics, on one end, we've been talking about this for months now, right? We talked about the governor's comments a few months ago now, it feels like weeks maybe, that started all this. And like you said, now every county is doing their own plan. We hear more and more plans coming, whether it be CDC or the individualized roadmaps, but it doesn't stop feeling overwhelming, right? It doesn't stop feeling overwhelming. And I think every time, and like you just said, it's personal for us. Our kids both go to school in Sacramento County. And even as individuals who have been helping our members think through some of these different restrictions or policies, or just changes that need to be in place to ultimately keep the health and safety of our students and our staff at the forefront, from the educator's perspective, from our administrator's perspective, it's hard not to be overwhelmed. From a parent's perspective, it's hard not to be overwhelmed about how different school may look. I think you hit it on the head in terms of it's the recommendations. I think we're going to see it looking different in one district to another. Frankly, just given the composition of schools, even within a district, one school can have slightly different policy and procedures in place than another. I think the beauty of the counties now working together is that we're trying to make this systematic as possible. One of the challenges in terms of it being recommendations, I know we've heard from a lot of our members, is that sometimes the recommendations become tough too, because they're still leaving it up to them, right? And our folks are experts when it comes to educating kids, to running schools, that we're really relying on the health experts to give us that guidance of what needs to be in place. But I think the consistent theme around this is that we want those guidelines to be flexible enough that they're grounded in the practicality of educating kids or running a school. So I think what we saw in Sac County was yet another example of that. I think we're seeing the community concern. And I think from some folks, as much as we've been talking about it, a lot of parents are seeing some of this for the first time or in more concrete terms. I think what we expect here in the next days, weeks, I mean, I know we've been saying this for a while, we are still expecting some more guidance from the state, from the California Department of Public Health, and also from the California Department of Education, both of which ACSA has been very involved in trying to give our perspective of our members there. But I think the theme, and this is something to probably already prepare our members to think about this work and the educators on the ground, that at the end of the day, there's going to be very few things that they're going to tell you to do in absolute terms, that it's really going to come down to our folks working with their local county health office. But ultimately, those decisions are going to fall on our school leaders in terms of what specific actions they have to take.
You know, one thing that I thought really rose to the top, the recommendations on athletics. And I know that there are discussions that are going to be taking place between the counties and the CIF. But the recommendations, the initial recommendations that came out from Sac County Office of Ed, they're recommending not having the sports of basketball, football, soccer, baseball, water polo, wrestling, and volleyball. Obviously, that causes a lot of concern, frustration, anger, sadness among those who have athletes in school. I had one of my friends today, Lily Davis, on Facebook talk about her daughter moving from middle school to high school and maybe missing out on soccer if these recommendations stay in place. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, just there's that standpoint of it, but then we have youth sports from there. And I wonder what the impact is going to be all the way down if this is what is being recommended as far as in high school, and how that trickles down to something like club soccer, where both you and I have daughters that play club soccer. This could have, you know, if this goes in place, mm-hmm. This is the reality of things a month from now, 2 months from now. This has a much wider impact than I think we even realize right now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know this issue as two youth sports coaches. I know that this issue hits close to home, and it comes up in pretty much every forum that we talk to school leaders about. And I think the recognition there is that school is more than instruction, right? It's more than just what happens in the classroom. It's all the wraparound services. And for many of our students and for our kids, it's those other things that keep them grounded and keep them motivated and keep them engaged, whether it be sports, athletics, or arts, or the arts, or any co-curricular or extracurricular activities. So I think this is a big issue, one that shouldn't be dismissed. I think obviously as these recommendations come out, there is that shock value about, oh no, this is going to look really different. I think to on more of another glimmer of hope, that you hit it on the head by saying this is as of June 2nd, right? The situation can change. We've been working with the state on a number of the guidelines that we talked about, and we have been told that the state is thinking about athletics, is thinking about youth sports. The CDC actually put out some guidelines. If anyone wants to look it up, it's the CDC guidelines, considerations for youth sports, for the return of youth sports. And as you can imagine, it's a phased in approach where we're going to first enter in and have trainings where there's no physical contact. And obviously as the health situation changes, then that would be modified. So I do think that the impact could be wide. I think for those folks who feel that this is absolutes, I think it's a very fluid situation. I think the state and local entities, depending again on their individual health situation, may have some flexibility to go a little bit further. It gets complicated for high school sports, obviously because of CIF, and you're competing oftentimes within teams and schools inter-county, so it's not all in the same locality, and that will present some challenges. But you talked about it. CIF is thinking about it. I know that they're putting forth a task force. So whether we have sports at the beginning of the academic year, I think is a big question, a big concern. There is a lot of people out there thinking about how do we gradually get them back, right? Even if initially we don't have them, that the goal is to bring back some of these activities that are so important to our students, that are so important to our families. Obviously, we have to balance all this while keeping, the safety and the health of our students and staff at the forefront. But it's an important issue for all of us, and one that here at ACSA we're also keeping an eye on.
Yeah, it's going to make for a really interesting others have for the NBA and Major League Baseball and even the NFL. And that discussion is out there, but on such a more localized level, some things could really change over these next couple of weeks. And these recommendations from Sac County could be, changed in a matter of weeks, and then we're looking at things opening up a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. The theme with all of this, whether we're talking about reopening schools or whether we're talking about bringing back youth sports, is that our folks, there's going to be a lot of flexibility in terms of individual schools or individual entities working with their individual local county health office to think about how much variance there's going to be. The state sets the minimum, and they're going to give the authority to be flexible with the county, but it's ultimately going to be a county by county decision in most of these cases.
Hey, as we get ready to wrap up the show, I do want to bring in our final guest of the afternoon. Michael Kelly is the executive producer of this show. He's our video storyteller, and he's also the anchor of the ACSA News, which comes on the air 5:30 on Thursday. Edgar, can you see the screen? Are you able to see Michael?
I can see him. He's there.
Michael and I have grown up in television for some time. And for those of you,
I knew this was coming.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, to take care of lighting and glare and all of that, TV people sometimes have to wear a little bit of makeup. I'm fine to admit that. Edgar and I are not currently wearing makeup. However, Michael, you do seem to be wearing a fair amount. Perhaps you want to let our viewers know where you're picking that up and all of that.
Can I just say there's a reason that I'm wearing it? It's not just for the legislative lunch break, though I know viewers need to see makeup caked on my face because that's necessary for this mug. But we do have studio lights in here, and we are getting ready to record another episode of ACSA News that'll come your way, as Naj mentioned, tomorrow evening. Mac, thanks so much. Appreciate the studio makeup. NW30 Studio Fix. Go pick it up.
Apparently, I didn't get that in my contract, Naj. I didn't get it.
You know what?
You didn't get that written in, Edgar? You got to talk to Wes and Scarlett about this because this Mac Studio stuff's good.
Yeah, we'll get that figured out. And you know what? For our viewers in Sacramento, what's funny about this is that the three of us are actually about 45 minutes apart from each other and haven't seen each other for weeks. So this is the only chance we get to really see each other. However, if you are in the Sacramento area, you may recognize the studio that Michael is in because Michael also has—
Yeah, let's pull this up here.
There you go. Michael also has the CBS 13 News videotaped and live from his studio over there in Natoma. So this is how you know that we're live, and we're a lot bigger than we just make it seem.
Yeah, so my wife, Adrienne Moore, is the evening anchor for the CBS station in Sacramento. And so as many of my colleagues have pointed out, this set looks very familiar because we also use it for her in the evenings at 6, 6:30, and 11 o'clock. So when you have a husband and wife sharing a television studio from the kitchen table, that kind of tells you what's going on right now from a social distancing standpoint. And yeah, it's quite the time.
There we go. All right, Michael, your show Thursday, the ACSA News coming up at 5:30. Thanks so much for being with us. Edgar, we do want to remind everybody that town hall coming up 5:30 on Monday here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. And Edgar, as I come to you one last time, a lot of work coming up over these next couple of weeks. You mentioned ACSA members really voicing about the budget, telling their stories. Would you just, how can they get involved? How can they be a little bit closer to having those discussions?
Yeah, we'll make it really easy for them. If you go to our website, ACSA.org, under the advocacy page, there's actually a real simple way there to just click and find your local legislator and help get a communication out to them. In addition to that, the governor's office, the policymakers, just taking this moment, and again, we recognize that there's a lot going on in the world right now. A lot of it that requires our dedicated and precise attention to the extent that we can, because this is all, I think this is kind of bringing it full circle, that what we're trying to do here for schools is that we know we have a role, not just in opening schools, but think about taking care of the social emotional needs of our kids when they come back and trying to address some of the challenges that are happening in our world right now. And that doesn't happen without resources. And that's why we're so consistent in asking our folks to have their voices heard, to tell the state what it is that we need, not just to open, but to do this work well. So yes, go to our website. It's pretty simple to go and just Google, contact the governor's office, and just take a moment to try to tell your story.
All right, Edgar, good seeing you, man. Stephen Crockett says thank you to us. I'm sure he says he enjoyed the show. Thank you, Stephen. Much appreciated. Edgar, we'll see you next week. We'll see you next Wednesday.
See you next week.
All right, folks, thanks so much for being with us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Again, we'll be back here Wednesday live with more information from the state capitol as we move closer to that constitutional budget deadline, and more special guests, more live TV that's coming up next Wednesday here at 1 o'clock on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great day.